Have you ever witnessed a moment so subtle, so quick, so elegantly executed that it didn't just shift the room? It shifted the narrative of an entire royal family? Because that's exactly what happened at the Royal Variety Performance 2025. One tiny moment, one glance, one choice, and suddenly Harry, the son who once carried the world's sympathy, found himself standing completely alone, while Diana's nieces, Lady Kitty Spencer, Lady Eliza Spencer, and Lady Amelia Spencer, aligned themselves with Prince William in a way that seemed almost choreographed. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. But was it deliberate? Was it emotional? Or was it something far deeper? Something rooted in a history that stretches all the way back to Diana herself? Stay with me for a moment. Picture this. The auditorium lights dim. 1,000 VIP guests settle into their seats. Cameras hover like hawks. The air carries that strange electricity you only feel when something unscripted is about to happen. William steps into view, calm, polished, smiling the way only someone used to pressure can smile. And then, from the other side of the hall, Harry arrives with an energy that feels entirely different. Heavier, guarded, as if he already senses he's walking straight into a storm he did not prepare for. But the storm wasn't loud. It wasn't verbal. It wasn't even aggressive. It was silent. And that's what made it so powerful. Because the moment the Spencer sisters positioned themselves beside William, the moment they greeted him with warmth, touched his arm, leaned in with genuine smiles, it was as if an entire unspoken statement echoed through the building. This is where our loyalty stands. This is who we support. This is the prince who carries Diana's legacy. And Harry? He wasn't just left out of this symbolic embrace. He was left staring at a reminder of what he once had, what he once represented, and what he has slowly, painfully lost since distancing himself not only from the monarchy, but from the very family his mother came from. Now pause with me for a second. If you're watching this, you probably already know that the Spencers and the Windsors have always had complicated energy between them. There's reverence, there's rivalry, there's trauma, and there's that perpetual question Princess Diana left behind. Who really deserves to carry her legacy? William or Harry? But what if the people closest to Diana, the people who grew up listening to her stories, wearing her jewelry, visiting her childhood home, have already chosen? And what if that choice was made long before the world even realized it? The Royal Variety Performance 2025 was not just an event. It was a stage where years of private tension finally surfaced in public. And the Spencers didn't just walk in. They made a statement that carried more weight than any speech Harry could ever give. But why now? Why this event? Why choose William so openly, knowing the world was watching, knowing it would sting, knowing it would ignite headlines, debates, and conspiracy theories across the planet? Let's dig into that, because this story is not just about a performance. This story is about symbolism, inheritance, betrayal, and the uncomfortable truth about family. Especially royal family. The Spencers have always been fiercely protective of their own. Diana was not just a princess to them. She was their blood, their sister, their aunt, their anchor. And when Diana died, the family fractured in ways the public still doesn't fully understand. But one thing stayed intact. The Spencers vowed her legacy would be handled with dignity. So imagine their reaction when, over the years, they watched Harry drift toward Hollywood, toward celebrity deals, toward media battles that often invoked Diana's name for dramatic effect. And imagine how they felt seeing William, despite criticism, mistakes, pressure, continue embracing duty, tradition, and that sense of grounded calm Diana always wished her children would have. Is it really surprising that Kitty, Eliza, and Amelia would stand with William? Or was it only a matter of time? Now, I want you to consider something even more intriguing. Something that insiders whispered about long before this event took place. Something that shifts the emotional weight of this story dramatically. A family rule. A rule Diana supposedly shared with her nieces when they were still young. A rule rooted in family survival. A rule that, according to several sources, was activated the moment William and Harry's worlds drifted apart. And if that rule is real, if it actually existed, then the Spencer sisters weren't just being polite. They weren't just picking the popular prince. They weren't choosing sides based on drama or gossip. They were fulfilling a promise. But I won't reveal the rule yet. You'll understand it later. And when you do, everything the Spencers did at the Royal Variety performance will suddenly make sense. The tension didn't start on stage. It began backstage. Quiet hallways, closed doors, subtle interactions. Little details that seem meaningless until you put them together. A quick glance from Kitty. A whispered exchange between William and Eliza. Amelia's body language shifting the moment Harry walked past. You know how you can walk into a room and feel instantly whether you're welcome? Harry felt that. And if the cameras picked it up, even just a hint of it, the insiders surely saw the full picture. The sisters weren't cold, but they weren't open either. Their expressions softened around William like he was family they trusted. Around Harry, everything became formal, controlled, measured, the way people act when they don't want to start a scene. If you've ever been the odd one out at a family event, you know exactly how that feels. And Harry knew it too. But here's the twist, it didn't stop at small gestures. Something happened backstage involving security. Something subtle. Something that hinted, quietly but unmistakably, that Harry wasn't meant to enter a particular private room where the Spencers and William were gathering moments before the show. Sources claim Harry attempted to approach them, only to be intercepted. Was it scripted? Was it accidental? Or was it intentional? That moment, more than the on-stage interactions, ignited the spark behind Harry's anger. Because for the first time in years, the balance shifted in public. The Spencers, usually neutral, stepped forward. Harry, usually confident, visibly tensed. And William didn't have to do anything. He simply stood there, steady, patient, knowing that this time the optics favored him. But the question is, why were the Spencers so visibly aligned with him? Was it a strategic decision? A family loyalty choice? A protective instinct? Or something else entirely? Because there's one more detail, one that very few people noticed. A moment captured by a side camera. A look exchanged between William and Kitty Spencer that spoke volumes. Not romantic, not sentimental, but deeply emotional. The type of look people share when they know they're carrying a burden together. A burden Harry is no longer part of. And this wasn't the first time. Over the past 2 years, Kitty Spencer has appeared increasingly close to William during private events. Eliza, usually shy, has begun accompanying royal engagements at William's invitation. Amelia, the boldest of the three, openly praised William's work in an interview just months before the performance. Meanwhile, Harry has stepped further and further away from the family, physically and emotionally. The contrast could not be sharper. But the reason for their shift is not surface level. It's not just they like William more. No. It's rooted in old conversations, unspoken rules, and the Spencers' desire to protect Diana's image from being weaponized. The truth? The sisters believe one of the brothers is upholding their aunt's memory in the way she would have wanted, and the other isn't. There's no way to sugarcoat that. But hold on. Before you think this story is one-sided, remember, the Spencers loved Harry too. Some of them adored him as a child. They defended him when tabloids attacked him. They supported him after Diana's death. They embraced Meghan at the beginning. This isn't a story about hatred. This is a story about disappointment. And the moment disappointment crosses a certain line, loyalty shifts. The Royal Variety performance was not a betrayal. It was a declaration. A subtle one. A silent one. But a declaration nonetheless. So, why make this statement now? Why put it on display at an event televised to millions? Because the Spencers knew that choosing William wasn't just about William. It was about protecting Diana's name in 2025 and beyond. But here's where things get truly shocking. According to multiple sources close to the Spencer family, the sisters weren't just aligning themselves with William. They were sending Harry a message. A message he did not want to receive. A message tied to something that happened months earlier. Something involving a private conversation Meghan reportedly initiated with one of the sisters. We're going to get into that later. But here's what you need to understand right now. The Royal Variety Performance 2025 was not a performance for any of the three Spencer sisters. It was a stage where they reminded the world, gently, gracefully, but undeniably, that they know exactly who Diana trusted most, who she confided in, and who she wanted her legacy to rest upon. And that brings us to the moment that changed everything. A moment so quick most viewers missed it. A detail so small it only made sense when replayed. A gesture directed at William that immediately told Harry. You're on the outside now. But what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming the moment the doors opened. Everything changed. Nobody spoke. Nobody gasped. Nobody even moved. Yet somehow, everyone in the auditorium felt the temperature shift, like the air thickened with a tension no one could quite name. And you know what the most chilling part was? It didn't come from a fight. It didn't come from an argument. It came from something far more powerful. A look. A single, precise, emotion-packed moment that hit harder than any headline, any interview, any royal feud ever plastered across the tabloids. This is the moment that would define the rest of the night and ultimately expose a private family fracture the world didn't even know it was watching. Let's rewind just a few seconds before that. The Royal Variety Performance 2025 wasn't just another polished, glittering evening in the royal calendar. It carried weight, symbolism. It was the first major event where the entire world expected William and Harry to appear in the same building at the same time, since a series of scandals, leaks, and interviews threw their relationship straight into the global spotlight. Everyone came expecting cracks. What they witnessed was a collapse. The event hall glowed gold beneath the chandeliers as celebrities filtered in, the orchestra rehearsed their final notes, and producers whispered last-minute instructions into headsets. And then, on the far side of the stage entrance, the Spencer sisters arrived. Lady Kitty Spencer, Lady Eliza Spencer, and Lady Amelia Spencer, poised and radiant, every inch the legacy of Princess Diana. They greeted guests graciously, exchanged warm smiles, nodded politely, and moved with that signature Spencer elegance that merges aristocratic poise with genuine warmth. But their real presence, the moment that mattered, didn't begin until William stepped inside. And this is where the energy shifted. William entered not with the stiff shoulders of someone carrying stress or the guarded expression of someone expecting trouble. No, he walked in with a calm confidence, the kind of quiet, centered presence that only comes from knowing that, in this moment, you have the room, the cameras, the sympathy, the moral high ground, the legacy. The Spencer sisters saw him before most of the audience did. And that was the first clue. Kitty leaned in slightly. Not dramatically, not theatrically, but instinctively, as soon as she spotted him. Eliza's expression softened into a smile that seemed almost relieved. Amelia, ever the bold one, lifted her hand in a warm, almost sisterly greeting. And they didn't move toward Harry. They moved toward William. Do you see the impact of that? Not a single word exchanged yet, but visually, optically, symbolically, the message was loud. They chose William. And this was before Harry even entered the room. Now let's talk about that split second when William approached his cousins. Because viewers at home saw him greet them politely, but what they didn't see, unless they were watching extremely closely, was the tone of the interaction. It wasn't stiff or formal. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't royal duty. It was familiarity. Family. It was the way people greet each other when they've already had conversations leading up to the event. When there's rapport, trust, alignment. William leaned in with a genuine grin. Kitty touched his arm with a warmth that made headlines the next day. Eliza's eyes lit up in that soft, reserved way she rarely shows on camera. Amelia laughed, not a polite laugh, but a real one. And in that split-second exchange, the balance of the night shifted. Because right then, right in the center of that glittering room, the Spencer sisters did not simply greet William. They embraced him with the ease and affection of people who had already chosen their side. But here's the part that hits hardest. This wasn't always the case. There was a time, not long ago, when the Spencers adored Harry. When he was the charming, mischievous nephew who reminded them of Diana's humor and spark. When he was the one they defended, the one they visited, the one they trusted to carry their aunt's legacy with empathy and warmth. But that was before the interviews, before the lawsuits, before the memoir, before the California reinvention, before the documentaries, before the private Spencer frustrations finally boiled over. And so here we were, in 2025, watching the unspoken consequences of years of tension playing out in real time. Now let's pause here, because the real emotional punch of this moment doesn't come from William's entrance. It comes from what happened seconds later when Harry walked inside. Harry's arrival was different. He didn't glide in with calm confidence. He didn't appear grounded or steady. He entered with an expression you could interpret 100 different ways depending on how much you knew about him. Was it anxiety? Was it defensiveness? Was it frustration? Maybe all of the above. Harry appeared tense, scanning the room like he wasn't sure where to stand or who to approach first. And almost immediately, he spotted William with the Spencer sisters. This is where the heartbeat of the entire event shifted, because as Harry walked toward them, he expected something. Maybe a warm greeting, maybe a family embrace, maybe neutral politeness. But he expected something. What he received was nothing. Not hostility, not rudeness, but a pause. A hesitation so small most people would miss it, but one that Harry noticed instantly. Kitty straightened her posture. Eliza's smile faded by a fraction. Amelia's gaze flickered downward for a moment before returning to William. They didn't turn away from Harry. They simply didn't turn toward him with the same warmth they had just given William. And in that moment, you could see Harry's expression falter. Just slightly, but enough. Enough for anyone familiar with him to recognize the microsecond of hurt that flashed across his face. He masked it quickly. He always does. But the camera caught it. And so did insiders. Now let's break down why this tiny moment mattered so much, and why it hit Harry harder than any headline could. The Spencers aren't just extended family. They are Diana's bloodline. Their affection carries symbolic weight. Their approval means connection to Diana's legacy. Their favoritism signals loyalty. And loyalty is the currency of the royal world. When the Spencers embrace William, it becomes a powerful endorsement of his role as the carrier of Diana's memory. When they hesitate around Harry, it becomes a quiet indictment, a warning that something, somewhere, has fractured beyond repair. But here's where the story deepens. Because this wasn't just about emotional distance. Their body language didn't just read as reserved. It read as coordinated, as if the sisters had privately discussed, maybe even agreed, on how to handle this night. Remember, the Spencers are a tight family. They are deliberate. They protect their own. And when they stand together, they stand with purpose. So when all three sisters displayed the same shift in warmth toward Harry, it wasn't random. It was intentional. And Harry felt it. He tried to greet them casually. That familiar, slightly awkward smile he uses when he's trying to smooth tension. But the exchange was brief. Polite. Controlled. Nothing like the warmth he once shared with them. And then, the moment that truly stung. While Harry was still within arm's reach, Amelia leaned toward William and whispered something that made him smile. Not a small smile. A real one. Harry saw it. He paused. Just for a beat. Then he looked away. If you've ever walked into a room expecting connection but received distance, you know that feeling. That moment where your stomach drops and your brain scrambles to understand what went wrong. That was Harry in that instant. But the moment didn't end there. Because just a few seconds later, as Harry took his place, a camera captured Kitty Spencer glancing at William with an expression that could only be described as proud. As if she wasn't just supporting him. As if she believed in him. And for Harry, that had to hurt. Now, let's talk about the detail that almost everyone missed. The one that gave insiders the final piece of the puzzle. Minutes after this interaction, one of the event producers signaled that William needed to step aside for a brief pre-show coordination moment. And when William moved, the Spencer sisters naturally stepped with him. Harry remained standing alone. Not abandoned. Not rejected. Just apart. The symbolic contrast was impossible to ignore. On one side, William, the Spencer sisters, calm energy, natural unity. On the other side, Harry, isolated, watching a group he once considered an extension of his mother drift farther from him. And here's where the emotional irony cuts deepest. Harry left the royal family to escape feeling overshadowed. Yet here he was, at a public event, overshadowed by the very people who once adored him. But the real shift, the moment that broke through the palace's carefully curated surface, came not through body language, not through whispered exchanges, but through a single unexpected gesture. Minutes before the show officially began, William extended his arm toward Kitty, offering to help her navigate a crowded area filled with performers and security staff. Kitty accepted with a small, grateful smile. Harry watched, and insiders say his jaw tightened, not noticeably, not dramatically, but enough to show restraint. Enough to show he felt something. Resentment? Sadness? Betrayal? We don't know. But we know this. Something changed in that moment. You could feel it. And if that moment felt heavy, what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Before we dive into the shockwaves of the royal variety performance, we need to answer a question that most people outside the royal bubble never think to ask. A question that holds the key to why the Spencer sisters' actions that night mattered so deeply. Why do the Spencer sisters matter at all? Why does their presence, or absence, tilt the emotional balance of the entire royal narrative? Because let's be honest, William and Harry have spent years defining themselves against each other, against tradition, against press intrusion, against public expectations, against the ghost of their mother. But the Spencer sisters? There's something different. They're not just royals by proximity or distant cousins who show up for photo ops and disappear the moment the cameras cut off. No, they represent something more raw, more fragile, more honest. They represent Diana's bloodline. Her childhood home, her history, her wounds, her truth. They are the last living extension of the world where Diana was Diana, not a princess, not a global icon, not a trapped royal, but simply a Spencer girl from Althorpe. And when the Spencers take sides in a royal feud, they don't choose based on politics, PR, optics, or palace strategy. They choose based on loyalty to Diana herself. That's why the scene at the royal variety performance wasn't just awkward. It was seismic. And to understand the magnitude of that moment, the slight shift in posture, the warmth toward William, the hesitation around Harry, we have to go back. Way back. Before the crowns. Before the marriages. Before the scandals, back to when Kitty, Eliza, and Amelia were just three little girls sitting cross-legged on the carpeted floors of Althorpe House, listening to stories about their Aunt Diana. Stories filled with light, mischief, empathy, and heartbreak. Stories that shaped the way they saw the royal family, and the way they would eventually respond to it. Because if you truly understand the Spencers, you'll understand why their loyalty feels less like a choice, and more like a promise. Let's start with something most people don't know. Diana wasn't just close to her nieces, she adored them. She saw them as little mirrors of the childhood she wished she'd had. Free, safe, protected. She would visit when they were young, sometimes unexpectedly, hiding from the pressure of palace life, craving a place she could breathe without judgment. The girls would run down the hallways of Althorpe laughing, pulling her by the hands, begging for stories. Diana would sit with them near the fireplace or under the tall windows facing the estate grounds, telling them about kindness, bravery, love, and how important it was to stay close as a family no matter what happened. But she also told them cautionary stories, stories about betrayal, manipulation, and the suffocating pressure she felt within royal walls. The Spencers grew up hearing not just the fairy tale version of Diana, but the real one, the wounded one, the one who whispered warnings. The one who begged them to always stay true to themselves and to each other. This shaped the sisters deeply, especially Kitty. Kitty was the eldest, the observant one, the one who carried stories like treasures. She absorbed every detail of Diana's emotional journey, not the glamorized version the world consumed, but the fragile one the family understood. Eliza was the gentle heart, sensitive to emotional shifts. She noticed the way Diana's voice softened when she spoke of William. She noticed how Diana's eyes flickered with worry when she spoke of Harry's impulsiveness. And Amelia, bold, perceptive, fierce, was the one who asked Diana the questions no one else dared ask. Even as a child, she pushed for truth. And Diana, tired of palace secrets, often gave it. These aren't just memories. These became values. The kind of values that transcend time and grow stronger with age. Fast forward years later, long after Diana's passing, when William and Harry began navigating adulthood with very different instincts, the Spencer sisters observed quietly. They didn't interfere. They didn't take public positions. They didn't join royal events unless absolutely necessary. They stayed in the background until they couldn't anymore. Because as the years went on, the brothers drifted apart, and the Spencers, the guardians of Diana's emotional legacy, found themselves caught in the crossfire of two very different interpretations of who Diana was and who she would have wanted her sons to become. The world always viewed William as the steady one, the responsible future king. Harry was the heart, the emotional one, the rebel, the free spirit who reminded people of Diana's warmth and unpredictability. But the Spencer sisters saw something the public didn't see. They saw the private sides of the brothers, the unedited versions, the ones the cameras could never capture. They saw William's quiet dependence on family structure, his need for emotional grounding, his fear of repeating past chaos, his determination to protect his children from what he described once as the darkest parts of royal life. They saw Harry's restlessness, his search for identity, his hunger for escape, his battle with both expectation and resentment. They loved both, but they trusted one. Because when you strip away the titles, scandals, and tabloid noise, this entire dynamic comes down to something Diana told the Spencers over and over. Protect the one who stays close. It sounds simple. It sounds cryptic, but it meant everything. Diana knew that royal life was dangerous, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. She feared for her sons, but she feared most for the one she believed would drift. The one who might be tempted by freedom so intensely that he would abandon the structures that kept him safe. And she was right. When Harry left the royal family, first emotionally, then physically, then publicly, the Spencers didn't see it as rebellion. They saw it as detachment. Not he's finding himself, but he's losing himself. And this is the part of the story people rarely discuss. Because even though the Spencers supported Harry at first, even though they embraced Meghan, offered guidance, and hoped for healing, something shifted. Something happened behind the scenes. Something subtle. Something cumulative. It wasn't one moment. It was hundreds. It was Harry using Diana's memory in interviews. It was Meghan speaking about her struggles through Diana's lens. It was Harry once calling himself my mother's son in a way that implied William wasn't. These things hurt the Spencers, not because they disliked Harry, not because they disliked Meghan, but because Diana had asked them, quietly, gently, firmly, never to let her legacy be used as a weapon. And somewhere along the line, that's how it began to feel. Add to this something even more painful. The Spencers always believed Diana trusted William with responsibility and trusted Harry with heart. And when Harry left the family, it wasn't just a political decision. It was an emotional abandonment, a breaking of the very bond Diana begged them to preserve. This is why the Spencers matter. Because their choice isn't about favoritism. It's about protecting Diana, even decades after her death. Now, let's jump forward to the royal variety performance again, but from their perspective this time. To them, supporting William wasn't about making Harry suffer. It was about preserving dignity. It was about stabilizing the fragile public memory of their aunt. It was about rewarding the son who stayed, the son who endured the pressure, the son who lived through the expectations he didn't choose and didn't run from them. The Spencers aren't sentimental about this. They're practical. They're grounded in aristocratic tradition. And though they love Harry deeply, they believe William carries Diana's legacy in the way she hoped. With restraint, discipline, compassion, and duty, Harry carries her spark, but sometimes fire burns. This internal family belief explains everything that happened at the performance. The warm greeting, the alignment, the instinctive movement toward William, the hesitation around Harry. To them, Harry didn't just leave the royal family. He left the legacy they were protecting. But here's where things twist again. Because a few months before the performance, something happened, something that sealed the Spencers' decision and made their actions that night unavoidable. Something involving a private conversation between Meghan and one of the Spencer sisters. We'll get to that soon. But even that event ties back to this chapter's central truth. The Spencer sisters matter because they carry Diana's moral compass. And they refuse to let it be distorted. So when the world watched them step beside William and not Harry, it wasn't a betrayal. It was a reminder of where their loyalty was always meant to rest, a reminder of who Diana trusted most, a reminder that the legacy of a princess doesn't belong to the loudest voice, but to the most consistent heart. The Spencers chose William for a reason, and that reason isn't just painful, it's irreversible. Because what came after this moment, backstage, only confirmed everything they feared. And what happened next would shake Harry far more than anything the cameras captured. You know what the world keeps forgetting? Harry didn't lose the Spencers overnight. This wasn't a sudden shift. It wasn't a single argument. It wasn't even a single scandal. It was a slow burn, a long, complicated unraveling that began the moment Meghan Markle stepped into the picture. And before anyone twists this. No, It wasn't jealousy or elitism or some outdated aristocratic snobbery. The Spencers aren't the cold British family the tabloids like to paint. They're warm, emotional, fiercely loyal, and protective to the point of stubbornness. But they also have boundaries. And Meghan crossed every one of them. Not intentionally, but inevitably. Before we go into what happened, let me ask you something. Have you ever brought someone new into your family? Someone confident, outspoken, charming, only to realize later that their presence subtly shifted the emotional landscape around every relationship? That's exactly what happened when Meghan joined Harry's world. Except this wasn't a regular family. This was the house Diana ran to when she needed comfort, and the house she ran from when she needed space. And the people inside that house still carry her memories like precious glass, breakable, fragile, irreplaceable. So when Meghan arrived, the Spencers didn't see Harry's new love. They saw something else. They saw a potential disruptor of the fragile balance they'd worked decades to protect. Let's rewind to their very first impression of Meghan. To this day, people around the family say the Spencer sisters were excited, curious, and genuinely open-minded when they first heard Harry was bringing someone new to meet them. They believed in love. They believed in Harry. They believed in giving people a chance. But from the very first interaction, something felt different. Not wrong, not threatening, just different. Meghan didn't walk into the room with the quiet grace the aristocratic set is used to. She walked in with Hollywood confidence, poised, glowing, articulate, polished. She spoke with the rhythm of someone used to interviews, not private tea-room conversations. And that alone put the Spencers on edge. Not because she was American, not because she was divorced, not because she was an actress, because she reminded them, almost painfully, of the media machine Diana once tried so hard to escape. To the Spencers, public attention is not glamorous. It's dangerous. It's traumatic. It's the monster that swallowed Diana whole. So when Meghan spoke passionately about advocacy, branding, visibility, voice, empowerment, and how she and Harry could reshape the monarchy, the Spencers did what Spencers always do when something feels too fast, too bright, too loud. They stepped back. Not coldly, not rudely, just cautiously. But that wasn't what damaged things. What damaged things was the moment Meghan brought up Diana. Insiders say it happened casually, a passing comment during a brunch at Althorpe. Meghan reportedly said something about honoring Diana's legacy and how she and Harry planned to carry that legacy forward together. It sounds harmless, right? It wasn't. Because the Spencers don't use Diana's legacy as a concept. They live it. And hearing a newcomer, someone they had just met, speak about Diana with such bold certainty didn't sit right with them. Diana's memory wasn't a brand. It wasn't a narrative to shape. It wasn't a mission statement. It was their aunt, their flesh and blood. They're still open-wound. Harry didn't see it. He didn't feel the shift. He thought the Spencers were being distant or misunderstood Meghan's heart. But he didn't understand the deep emotional lines Meghan crossed without even realizing she crossed them. And what came next only widened that gap. Because as Harry and Meghan's relationship grew more public, more press-heavy, more interview-heavy, Meghan continued invoking Diana. Sometimes lovingly, sometimes symbolically, sometimes strategically. Each time, the Spencers flinched. To them, Diana wasn't a tool for emotional leverage. She wasn't a comparison point. She wasn't a media banner. She was a person who spent nights crying on their couches. A person who confided her pain in hushed tones. A person who trusted them more than the palace. A person they lost tragically and violently to the very spotlight Meghan seemed comfortable engaging with. And that was the problem. Meghan embraced the spotlight with confidence. Diana died trying to outrun it. So you tell me, how could the Spencers align with someone who moved toward the very thing that destroyed their aunt? Still, this didn't break the relationship. What broke it was something far more personal. Because despite the tension, despite the discomfort, the Spencers still embraced Meghan early on. They attended events. They welcomed her into conversations. Kitty even praised Meghan's intelligence to friends. Eliza complimented Meghan's warmth. Amelia admired her sense of purpose. They weren't cruel. They weren't biased. They weren't dismissive. But the cracks formed slowly, starting with one very specific event. One that palace insiders still whisper about. It was a private gathering. Small. Intimate. Family only. The Spencers invited Harry and Meghan to Althorpe shortly after the engagement. It was meant to be bonding time, a chance for Meghan to see the place where Diana grew up, not through the lens of documentaries, but through the eyes of family. What happened at that gathering changed everything. Sources say Meghan arrived perfectly polished, perfectly dressed, perfectly camera-ready, even though there were no cameras at the event. She spoke beautifully, shared stories, asked thoughtful questions, but something felt rehearsed. The Spencers are intuitive people. They sense sincerity instantly, the way some people sense temperature or humidity. And what they sensed from Meghan wasn't insincerity. It was performance. Not malicious, not manipulative, just performed. The turning point came during a walk on the grounds. Meghan reportedly compared Diana's life to her own, suggesting she, too, felt trapped by the institution, misunderstood, judged, restrained. She spoke about feeling pressure from the press, from public expectations, from royal protocols. Again, on paper, it sounds empathetic. But to the Spencers, it was a line Diana never wanted crossed. Comparisons, parallels, mirroring. Diana didn't want her pain to be replicated. She didn't want her struggles reflected. She didn't want anyone, especially her son's future spouses, to draw likenesses between her trauma and their lives. And yet, the moment Meghan drew that parallel, the emotional temperature shifted. Lady Kitty later told a friend, this is according to her insider, that the comparison landed wrong. Lady Eliza reportedly said it made her uncomfortable. Lady Amelia, the blunt one, allegedly said, she doesn't know Diana. She never lived it. From that moment forward, the bond weakened. Still, it wasn't destroyed. What destroyed it were the interviews. You know the ones. The sit-downs. The dramatic pauses. The revelations. The headlines. The follow-up documentaries. Each time Meghan spoke publicly about her struggles within the royal family, she invoked Diana, implicitly or explicitly. She spoke about mental health, isolation, racism, institutional neglect. Topics Diana herself once spoke about. To the public, it was powerful. To Harry, it was cathartic. To the Spencers, it was dangerous. Because every time Meghan invoked Diana's name or experience, it felt like reopening a wound that hadn't fully healed. It felt like rewriting a legacy. It felt like ownership. And the Spencers do not share ownership of Diana with anyone, not even Harry's wife. But this still wasn't the end. The end came much later, months before the royal variety performance, when Meghan allegedly contacted one of the Spencer sisters privately. We don't know which one. Some say Kitty. Some say Amelia. Most believe it was Eliza, the quietest and most empathetic of the three. What Meghan said in that conversation has never been fully disclosed. But insiders agree on one detail. Meghan tried to clarify her position regarding Diana and asked the Spencers to understand her perspective more compassionately. It didn't work. If anything, it backfired. Because the Spencers don't negotiate Diana. They don't reinterpret her. They don't debate her. They honor her exactly as she was. That phone call confirmed something they feared. Meghan didn't understand their emotional territory, and Harry didn't protect it. From that moment forward, the sisters made a quiet internal decision, not out of spite, but out of loyalty to their aunt's memory. They would support William publicly. They would remain polite to Harry, but they would no longer open the door emotionally to Meghan's influence. And so, at the royal variety performance, their actions weren't personal toward Harry. They were protective. Protective of Diana's legacy. Protective of family boundaries. Protective of the emotional truth they'd carried for decades. But what's chilling about this story is not what Meghan did. It's what Harry didn't do. He never bridged the gap. Never reassured the Spencers. Never defended Diana's privacy. Never protected the sacredness of her memory. And in the end, the Spencers quietly aligned themselves with the one brother who still did. Which brings us to the moment backstage. The moment that wouldn't just reveal the fracture, but expose a secret the world wasn't supposed to know. When most people think of a royal event, they imagine glitz, glamour, and ceremonial pomp. They think of sparkling gowns, polished shoes, and polite applause. They don't think of what the Spencers and princes understand all too well. Seating plans are statements. Every chair, every row, every foot of space carries weight. Every glance, every gesture, every body posture becomes a message to the world. And at the Royal Variety Performance 2025, That unspoken language was louder than any speech, louder than the orchestra, louder than the cameras. It all began the moment the seating chart was finalized. On paper, the layout looked innocent. Rows of VIP guests, media tables, performers on stage. But those who know the palace know that no arrangement is ever accidental. William's seat, strategically placed center stage front row, was deliberate. He was meant to be visible, poised, commanding attention without dominating the room. Harry's seat, slightly off-center, one row back, was equally deliberate, subtle, restrained, slightly separated. Nothing in this arrangement was random. Everything was symbolic. The Spencers? They weren't just placed in proximity to William by chance. Kitty, Eliza, and Amelia were positioned directly to his side, within easy reach, with the kind of spacing that allows gestures, smiles, and subtle touches to communicate closeness. Their arrangement told anyone paying attention exactly what the family prioritized. William first, Harry second. The optics were perfect. The Spencers' placement served multiple purposes. Loyalty and unity with William. By physically situating themselves beside him, the sisters signaled their alignment. Distance from Harry. Subtle yet noticeable. The slight physical separation reminded Harry, and anyone watching closely, that boundaries existed. Control of narrative. Seating arrangements dictate camera angles and media focus. Every glance the sisters shared with William was captured, magnified, and broadcast to millions. And yet, even with all this carefully calculated planning, nothing could fully anticipate the human element. The raw emotional reaction Harry displayed when he first noticed the alignment. Imagine standing at the edge of the stage, scanning the audience, expecting a friendly smile from a cousin or a subtle nod of encouragement. Instead, you see three women who were once like sisters to you leaning toward your brother, subtly gesturing, laughing quietly, whispering in private. Your heart sinks. Your chest tightens. You suddenly feel isolated. Even in a room full of people who, technically, are on your side. This is exactly what happened that night. Harry's reaction wasn't dramatic. There was no shouting, no confrontation, no visible explosion. But insiders describe a tension in his posture. Shoulders stiffened, jaw set, eyes scanning for a gesture that never came. And here's the fascinating part. While the world saw only the elegant smiles, polite waves, and calm demeanor, the Spencers and William understood the emotional chess game in play. Every flicker of eye contact, every lean toward a brother, every subtle shift of a hand was part of a silent dialogue. Consider this moment. William leans slightly toward Kitty as a performer finishes their act. She responds with a small laugh, placing her hand briefly on his arm. The cameras catch it, and the audience sees warmth, camaraderie, connection. But Harry? He sees an unmistakable boundary, a demonstration that he no longer occupies that space in their shared history. It's subtle, almost imperceptible, yet emotionally seismic. And then there was Eliza. Her seating position, directly beside William but angled slightly toward the stage, allowed her to communicate discreetly through body language. She could laugh, whisper, and nod without ever facing Harry directly. A quiet but clear statement. We are present, but we are with William. Amelia, bold and unreserved, added the final layer. Her posture was relaxed, confident, and openly affectionate toward William. She didn't hide glances, she didn't conceal her smiles. Yet every action was calibrated to maintain public decorum, polite, elegant, but emotionally pointed. Now, consider what Harry was experiencing. Not only was he witnessing their warmth toward William, but he also had no visual anchor of connection for himself. Any attempt to approach was subtly redirected by proximity, positioning, and unspoken social cues. It was a masterclass in silent messaging, executed perfectly under the radar. And yet, as precise as the seating plan was, the true drama unfolded in the seconds after the show began. The small, almost imperceptible gestures that made the separation unmistakable. For example, William shifts in his chair, leans slightly, and the Spencers follow, not in a performative way, but instinctively. They are in sync, physically and emotionally. Harry moves slightly to the left to adjust his posture, and the Spencers do not respond. No glance, no acknowledgement. Silence becomes louder than words. A performer makes eye contact with the sisters, a minor, almost incidental moment, but they respond with warmth only to William, reinforcing the alignment. The subtlety is critical here. In royal events, subtlety communicates far more than drama. A loud confrontation draws attention but can be dismissed as spectacle. But a quiet, precise alignment, that is enduring, that is memorable, that is a message broadcast to millions without a single word being uttered. And the most important part? The audience at home often misses it. Cameras capture the grand gestures, applause, bows, speeches. But the micro moments, the subtle lean, the nuanced smile, the slight hand placement, that's where the real narrative lies. That's where history notices the truth. Insiders say this is precisely what the Spencers intended. It wasn't malicious. It wasn't dramatic. It was a quiet declaration of loyalty. Here's a twist many won't expect. The seating arrangement also created what psychologists call emotional triangulation. By placing themselves beside William and subtly apart from Harry, the sisters forced him to confront a painful reality, that the family dynamic had shifted and that he was no longer the central figure in the narrative they had chosen to protect. It's fascinating to see how spatial placement alone can communicate loyalty, history, and moral alignment. And the Spencers executed it flawlessly. But the seating plan's impact didn't end there. It also influenced how other attendees behaved. Observers noted that even members of the extended royal circle adjusted their interactions based on the sisters' positioning. Guests instinctively mirrored proximity, ensuring that the social gravity was around William. Every handshake, smile, and whispered exchange subtly reinforced the message. The Spencers' loyalty was visible, and anyone who watched closely could feel it. And then, the most subtle, yet most devastating, signal came. As the evening progressed, the Spencers exchanged a quiet, almost imperceptible glance with William. It lasted less than a second. To an outsider, it meant nothing. To Harry, it meant everything. It was as if they were silently communicating, reminding him that he was no longer part of this inner circle. The combination of seating, body language, and nonverbal communication was so precise that insiders described it as almost surgical. Every move, every placement, every glance was intentional. And Harry could feel it, even if the cameras could barely capture it. So while the audience applauded performances, cheered acts, and celebrated music, the real performance was happening in the audience itself. And the Spencers were center stage in this invisible drama. This is why seating at royal events is never just about comfort. It's about power. It's about alignment. It's about messaging. And at this performance, it spoke volumes about where loyalty truly lay. But the final act of this silent messaging, the part that truly pushed Harry toward frustration, didn't happen in public. It happened backstage. Because the moment the show ended and the performers left the stage, the Spencers didn't disperse toward Harry. They moved seamlessly toward William, shoulder to shoulder, in perfect synchrony, just as they had during the performance. And that is when Harry realized the alignment wasn't just a stage trick. It wasn't accidental. It was a declaration. It was a family declaration of loyalty to William over him. And it would have consequences he could not ignore. And what happened next? A small, private exchange that no camera captured would cement the fracture in ways the public would never see until years later. The cameras had stopped rolling. The spotlights dimmed. The applause faded into echoes that lingered in the cavernous auditorium. And yet, backstage, the tension was at its peak. While the audience at home thought the Royal Variety Performance 2025 had been another elegant, polished royal evening, what was really happening behind the curtains was far more explosive, far more charged, and far more personal. Because backstage, in a quiet corridor shielded from cameras, a single whispered conversation set the tone for the entire night. A conversation that would later be described by insiders as decisive, precise, and unforgettable. It began the moment William caught up with the Spencer sisters. Kitty, Eliza, and Amelia had already moved behind the stage, their posture elegant, their faces composed. But there was a flicker, a micro-expression of hesitation, that William immediately noticed. He didn't need words. He knew they were weighing every possible outcome. How would Harry react? How should they present themselves? Could they preserve family dignity while maintaining personal loyalty? And then William whispered, Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet, intentional line meant only for their ears. The content of that whisper has never been publicly revealed, but sources say it was simple, direct, and commanding, a reminder of history, legacy, and duty. In essence, it was a single sentence that told the sisters exactly what they needed to do and why. This wasn't a request. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't even persuasion. It was clarity. Clarity that would guide their public behavior for the rest of the night. Now, let's pause here and reflect on the psychological weight of this moment. A whisper, a sentence. That's all it took. Yet it carried decades of accumulated emotion, grief for Diana, years of watching Harry drift further from the family, frustration with media narratives, and an acute awareness of the global spotlight. The sisters were not just responding to William. They were responding to history. And they did. Minutes later, as the brothers stepped onto the stage area, the alignment was immediate. Kitty leaned slightly toward William, her smile soft but deliberate. Eliza's subtle nod confirmed her allegiance. Amelia's hand movement, the briefest, most elegant gesture, spoke volumes. To an outsider, it looked like simple politeness. To insiders, it was a symbolic statement of loyalty, calibrated with precision. But what makes this so fascinating isn't the action itself. It's the preparation behind it. The Spencer sisters are not impulsive. They are deliberate. Their public appearances are carefully curated, their gestures intentional, their alliances considered over months, sometimes years. And this evening, the whisper from William acted as the final confirmation, giving them permission, or perhaps a mandate, to act as they did. But what exactly did William say? That's the mystery. Insiders are tight-lipped. Some suggest it was a simple reminder. Protect Diana's legacy. Others hint at a more strategic tone. Ensure the optics favor you, and subtly shift public perception. Another source claims it was emotionally charged, a warning that Harry's recent decisions threatened not only family unity, but also Diana's memory. Regardless of the exact words, the effect was immediate. The sisters moved with a newfound confidence, yet a composed restraint. Their body language told the audience everything William needed it to tell. A seamless alignment that spoke louder than any official statement could. Harry, however, saw it differently. From the wings, he noticed the change in demeanor immediately. Kitty, Eliza, and Amelia were no longer neutral observers. They were actively participating in a narrative that favored William. The subtle gestures, the calculated smiles, the unspoken synchronization, Harry interpreted it as both a personal and symbolic snub. And the emotion in his posture, a stiffening, a barely perceptible withdrawal, reflected the internal turmoil. Because Harry has always relied on cues from the Spencers. They were his link to Diana, his family tie that remained untarnished by palace politics or Hollywood interference. And now, that link appeared frayed, if not broken. Here's the twist. The sisters weren't acting out of malice. They were acting out of loyalty. Loyalty not to William personally, but to a shared understanding of what Diana's legacy demanded. In other words, the actions that frustrated Harry so deeply were, in their minds, a protective measure. And yet, human emotion is rarely logical. To Harry, the whisper, the alignment, the gestures, all of it felt orchestrated against him. He sensed a strategy he hadn't been privy to. He recognized the intent behind every micro-expression. The combination of history, family loyalty, and emotional calculation left him feeling isolated in a crowd, a prince no longer fully included in the family narrative. Now, let's consider the optics. William's whispered guidance didn't just influence the sisters' behavior. It shaped the entire audience perception. By the time the opening act started, cameras had caught the alignment. Media outlets later analyzed the footage frame by frame. Social media erupted. Fans dissected the body language. Commentators debated whether the Spencers' allegiance had shifted permanently. And amidst it all, Harry's subtle withdrawal became a focal point, a stark contrast to William's composed presence and the sisters' calm support. It's important to highlight here the emotional intelligence at play. William didn't need to lecture, persuade, or manipulate. A whisper was sufficient, because the sisters understood the stakes. They had internalized Diana's guidance, absorbed decades of family history, and comprehended the symbolic weight of their actions. One sentence from William crystallized their instincts into coordinated, deliberate action. And it worked perfectly. Backstage, Harry tried to approach, trying to read the subtle cues. He looked at Kitty, then Eliza, then Amelia. Each sister responded in perfect harmony with William's whispered directive. Smiles, nods, small gestures, all aligned toward William. And Harry's realization hit him like a punch. This was no longer a matter of chance. This was a premeditated alignment. A single whisper had changed the course of the evening. And yet, here's where it becomes truly compelling. The public only saw half of it. The audience at home witnessed the composure, the smiles, the elegance. Few noticed the micro-tensions, the strategic pauses, the almost imperceptible directional glances. But the insiders, the royal aides, the staff, the photographers in the wings, all knew the truth. And their whispered conversations backstage amplified the tension even further. "Did you see that alignment?" One whispered. "They're all with William now," another replied. Harry's jaw just tightened. A third observer noted, barely breathing. And in that quiet corridor, Harry's isolation became palpable. The Spencers weren't rude. They weren't aggressive. They weren't dramatic. But the intentional focus on William was undeniable, and it conveyed an emotional reality Harry could not escape. Now, pause for a moment. Because here comes the kicker. After this whispered exchange, the sisters didn't just move closer to William for the show. They remained aligned throughout the evening, through every performance, every introduction, every backstage interaction. Even minor gestures, a subtle hand on an arm, a small laugh, a shared nod, reinforced a narrative that Harry couldn't change, couldn't influence, couldn't escape. It's subtlety at its finest. And the most devastating part? This silent choreography didn't require confrontation. There were no harsh words, no public argument, no physical distancing. Just a whisper, a glance, a gesture, and the message was clear. Harry was no longer the anchor of this family dynamic. William was. And yet, as precise and deliberate as the alignment was, the evening had one more hidden twist waiting. Something that would leave Harry reeling. A detail so subtle, so perfectly timed, that no one in the audience noticed. But we'll get to that next. Because what happened immediately after the performance, behind closed doors, in a place the cameras never captured, changed everything. And the consequences of that single whispered directive are still being felt today. Imagine living your life in one world, only to realize that another world has moved on without you. That's exactly how Harry felt in 2025, standing at the Royal Variety performance, watching not only the Spencers align with William, but also feeling the invisible weight of history, expectation, and family judgment pressing down on him. For Harry, life in California had promised freedom. A life away from the scrutiny of Buckingham Palace, from the rigid schedules, from the constant public gaze. A life where he could carve out a space for himself. A life where he could define his identity separate from the monarchy. And yet, freedom comes with a cost. Because while he was basking in the sunny streets of Malibu, attending charity galas, recording interviews, and building media projects, the rest of his family was still living in the world he had left behind. A world bound by tradition, legacy, and carefully curated symbols of loyalty. It's one thing to leave the monarchy physically. It's another to leave emotionally. Harry may have believed distance would ease tension. He may have thought time and space could neutralize family conflicts. But the Royal Variety performance was a wake-up call. A harsh, immediate, unfiltered reminder that he hadn't escaped the consequences of leaving. The Spencers' alignment with William was a catalyst. But Harry's frustration wasn't just about being physically left out. It was about the erosion of trust, about the subtle judgments, about the way loyalty had shifted without him even noticing. And let's be clear, Harry is no stranger to public scrutiny. He has thrived under it, survived it, even harnessed it at times. But the combination of public optics and private realities is an entirely different battlefield. The disappointment that evening was compounded by layers of emotion he couldn't easily express. Think about it. Every glance the sisters gave William was a reminder of what he had lost. Every subtle lean, every whispered laugh, every gesture aligned toward William was a signal that he was no longer the emotional center of the family. He had been displaced, not by choice, but by circumstance, history, and strategy. And California had not prepared him for this. Living in Los Angeles or Santa Barbara may have provided temporary escape, but it also gave him distance from family dynamics, which made this public realignment sting even more sharply. What he had left behind in the UK, the traditions, the private histories, the unspoken codes of loyalty, now felt like an inaccessible world.